Hello and welcome to the Providence College podcast. I'm Michael Hagan from the class of 2015, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge from the class of 2005. Our guest today is Dr. Ed Dain, professor of philosophy and recipient of the 2022 Joseph R. Accinno Teaching Award, Providence College's highest honor for teaching excellence. Dr. Dain came to Providence College in 2011 from the University of Chicago, where he was a Harper Schmidt Fellow in the Humanities. He earned his Ph.D. at Cardiff University in Wales and has taught philosophy in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway. Dr. Dain, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. It's great to be invited.
So college application season is upon us, and high school seniors are anxiously considering their next educational chapter. Why should students applying to college consider schools that encourage or even require the study of philosophy?
That's a really good question. One reason is just that there are real practical benefits to studying philosophy because it focuses so heavily on skills of reasoning and argument, analysis. That makes students who've studied philosophy really employable. So there's a good kind of practical reason, kind of career-orientated reason for wanting to study philosophy. There are much deeper reasons too, it seems to me. We're not all going to be nurses or lawyers or doctors or accountants, but in a sense, all of us already are philosophers. We just can't help taking a stand on philosophical questions. We're always going to run into ethical issues. We're always going to need to think about what kind of society we want to live in, and so who we should vote for and things like this. So philosophy is really relevant to so much of our everyday lives, it seems to me, that we have really good reasons for wanting to studying it, maybe wanting everyone to study it. So that's my answer to this question, why everyone should pick a college where they're forced to study philosophy.
You mentioned that philosophy, in addition to much deeper reasons for studying it, it helps make students employable. Are there any well-known or notable figures who our listeners would be surprised to know studied philosophy?
Yeah, there are so many. There are huge lists of famous people who've studied philosophy online. I'm terrible at remembering them. It's a really popular route into politics. So I think Emmanuel Macron, the current French president, is a philosophy student or former philosophy student. I think both of the candidates to be the next UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, both studied philosophy as part of this PPE degree that is pretty popular in the UK. It's philosophy, politics, and economics. It's also a popular route into law. Famous people like Harrison Ford, Rashida Jones, the actress. So you should look online. There are so many. It's actually surprisingly popular.
And why should, say, business students or students outside of the humanities, why shouldn't they sleep through their philosophy core courses as students here?
Well, one good reason is that if they do that, they're going to fail that course.
Very practical.
It seems to me that philosophy really emphasizes the ability to think independently, the ability to think for yourself, whatever the subject matter is. That's what I'm trying to teach my students, is what my colleagues are trying to teach their students, right? I think, in a way, philosophy does that better than business studies. So when you go out into the world, you want a career in business, you want to be employable, I think philosophy and other humanities disciplines really encourage those skills that are going to make you employable. And it's a stat that philosophers love to kind of gloat over, is that philosophy majors tend to do much better on graduate entry exams like the GMAT for graduate business school than business students actually do. So if you're a business student and you're thinking, well, who cares about this philosophy stuff? Paying attention to studying philosophy and really thinking seriously about philosophical problems and arguments is going to help you achieve the goals that you set out to achieve when you chose to study business.
Now, philosophy, of course, it's not all just banging your head against a copy of the Critique of Pure Reason. There's a lot of engagement and hands-on learning involved. What are some examples of interesting student research projects in philosophy from recent semesters?
That's great. Yeah. I've supervised a couple. I think the most recent one I supervised was actually on philosophy of mind in the Catholic philosophical tradition. much contemporary philosophy of mind is very kind of materialist or physicalist. It takes as its starting point the assumption that we're just physical beings in a physical universe, and when we die, that's it, right? So this student really wanted to think about how we could think about the mind in a way that makes room for the Catholic belief in life after death. So that was a really interesting research project for me to work on with that student. I've supervised other ones on figures like Kierkegaard and Wittgenstein. I know colleagues have supervised some on feminism. It's really all kinds of topics. I think there was one a little while ago on Mad Max, the film. So there are plenty of really interesting research topics out there that our students are engaging in.
And what are some of our recent philosophy alumni from Providence College up to these days?
Well, again, it's a real mix, actually, of interesting things. Some go on to grad school in philosophy, obviously, at the master's level or at the Ph.D. We've had some go on to grad school in law. I know of someone who's doing Teach for America, another who's just gone into finance. So it's a real smorgasbord of different options that it opens up.
Right. So your philosophical research, and you just mentioned Wittgenstein, is focused largely on the thought of Ludwig Wittgenstein in connection with, and I'm pulling this from your faculty bio page, but largely in connection with a wide range of areas of philosophical inquiry like ethics and epistemology. For those of us for whom second year Civ feels like a long time ago, can you give us a brief reintroduction to Wittgenstein the man?
Well, yeah, okay. So Wittgenstein the man, he was actually a really interesting person with quite an extraordinary life. He was born in Vienna in 1889, I think. His family were one of the richest families in Austria, probably in Europe at the time. Extraordinarily cultured. He was the youngest of several brothers and sisters. I think most of them regarded him as the kind of stupid one in the family, actually. He went off to study engineering initially and then switched to study philosophy under Bertrand Russell in Cambridge. Russell, I think, initially regarded Wittgenstein as stubborn and annoying, but within a very short space of time, he was kind of describing Wittgenstein as being really the next big thing. That was in 1912, 1913. Obviously, World War I broke out. Wittgenstein, as an Austrian, went to fight for the Central Powers. He signed up as an ordinary soldier. He was recognized for bravery. He finished his first book in a prisoner of war camp. Since that book, which was only like 80 pages long, since that book, according to him, solved all of the problems of philosophy, he then retired. He became a gardener for a little while. He became a school teacher in some remote villages in Austria. He designed a house for his sister. And then in the late 1920s, he started to have some kind of new thoughts, some doubts about his earlier claim to have definitively solved all the problems of philosophy. And that led him back to Cambridge. Spent most of the rest of his life working there, trying to produce his kind of next masterpiece, the Philosophical Investigations. If you're interested in his life, there is actually a really fantastic biography of him by a guy called Ray Monk. It's one of the great philosophical biographies.
We can drop a link to the page to purchase that biography into the show notes. So if anybody's interested, you can find it there. So in layman's terms, and you mentioned that, Wittgenstein early in his career kind of felt that he had figured it all out, had solved philosophy, and then started second guessing that as the decades went on and, went back to the grindstone. In layman's terms, or as close as we can get to them, what are some of the unique or otherwise significant aspects of Wittgenstein's thought, either his early thought or his later thought?
Yeah, well, one kind of current that runs throughout his thought is this idea that philosophical problems are characteristically confusions. They're not real problems at all. And the way to solve them is to investigate the way those problems are phrased, the words and the concepts that are used to form them. And through that, Wittgenstein thinks we'll discover that we're misusing those words. So we're not really saying anything at all. In his early and his later work, he has different ideas about what exactly the analysis of language involves. But that's the kind of crucial idea that runs throughout his thoughts, that philosophical problems are actually a form of confusion. We need to treat them with a kind of therapy almost, rather than provide substantive answers to them.
So how did you come to be interested in philosophy generally and Wittgenstein specifically?
Yeah, so it's kind of by accident. I think a lot of philosophers will tell you this, that they ended up studying philosophy by accident. I went off to study literature and philosophy at Cardiff University as an undergrad. Literature was what I was really interested in. I didn't really know what philosophy was. It was really just a word for me. It sounded kind of cool. I thought maybe it had something to do with Aldous Huxley, who's famous for writing The Doors of Perception, where he kind of took some experimental drugs and described his experiences. I really had no idea what philosophy was about. After a year or two studying it in Cardiff, I found that although I loved studying literature, it was kind of easy and it didn't feel so rewarding as a result. Whereas the philosophy I found really hard. I was getting terrible grades. So counterintuitively, I thought that's what I should really spend my time working on. In another sense, it wasn't so accidental at all, because it turned out, as I learned more about philosophy, that I'd really been interested in philosophical questions for a long time. I just didn't really know that that's what they were. So when I first started studying philosophy of science, for instance, I found that lots of worries I had about the status of science were actually being raised in a really significant and interesting way by philosophers I was reading. And for me, they were kind of this vague unhappiness at my science lessons as a kind of teenager. So it's partly accidental and partly really not accidental at all. And then Wittgenstein, as I learned more about philosophy, it was a similar kind of thing with the move from literature to philosophy. I found that I could understand a lot of philosophers, but Wittgenstein I really couldn't understand. So I figured I ought to spend more time working on that. And I started to be really kind of sucked in by his vision of what philosophy was. I found it really exciting. There was some really interesting work being done on Wittgenstein at the time by two people, Cora Diamond and James Conant, which made it a really lively thing to work on. And I just got hooked. And I really do think that Wittgenstein's approach to philosophical problems is really promising. So that's how I ended up kind of focusing first on philosophy and then on Wittgenstein.
I like your approach of, like you said, kind of counterintuitively diving right into the stuff that you're struggling the most with. I feel it's challenging, but it sounds rewarding. So tell us a little bit about your career before coming to Providence College. I'm interested in particular in your experience at the University of Chicago and also your time teaching in Norway.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, well, before both of those, I studied in Cardiff in the UK. That was really lovely. I had a wonderful experience there. I did my undergraduate, my master's, and my PhD there. At the end of that, I went to University of Chicago, mostly to work with this guy I just mentioned, Jim Conant, because his work on Wittgenstein was so interesting. And at the time, he was running a Wittgenstein workshop with lots of really exciting speakers coming in all the time. So it was a great place to be. I think I really learned how to think in an exciting and original and constructive way about philosophy from my experience in Chicago. So it was a really wonderful opportunity for me to be there and to work with these really fantastic philosophers. As a Harper Schmidt there, I taught in the core curriculum. Greek thought and literature, teaching texts that many of which come up in the first semester of DWC here. So that was really, really great. That's where I kind of formed my love for those texts. I haven't mentioned Norway, but yeah, I've done some teaching in Norway too. But one of the things I love about Norway is that actually all students, no matter what the subject, have to study philosophy. So it takes that PC model and it applies it to everyone. I think that's fantastic. There, it's a real social commitment. I think that to be a good citizen, you've got to take a view on these things. So
So you mentioned there the Western Civ program that we have here at PC. How do you enjoy teaching in that program?
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. Like I said, I started teaching texts like the Iliad, like Herodotus, like Sophocles, Aeschylus, and so on, back in Chicago. And to me, looking to move on from there at the end of my fellowship, it was a real concern that I wouldn't get to teach these things again because they're not part of a standard philosophy curriculum. So the fact that I get to carry on teaching these texts that kind of fall outside the standard philosophy curriculum is really wonderful. And also working with colleagues in history and literature, some fantastic people like Steve Smith and Ian Bernhoft, who I'm teaching with right now. It's really wonderful. It's really invigorating. I like that a lot.
How would you, and you're something of an authority now as the Accinno Award winner. You're an authority on pedagogy. So, how would you describe your approach to teaching philosophy?
It's such a hard thing to describe in a way, but for me, philosophy is essentially a practice. It's a skill. You don't learn about philosophy, you learn to philosophize. And that's really my emphasis, is to get students thinking for themselves and coming up with their own answers, coming up with their own criticisms or arguments in support of the kind of views that we're reading about. But essentially, it's all about thinking for yourself. That's if I can sum it up in one short phrase, it's just about that.
I hope I'm recalling this right, but when I was abroad as an undergraduate, I remember a lecture in which a philosopher described philosophical questions as one that other methodologies have not found ways to answer. What are some examples of enduring philosophical questions that other disciplines fall short of answering?
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know if I agree in a way that's true of what a philosophical question is, but there are so many wonderful questions out there that really do go back to the kind of the beginnings of philosophy. I structure my intro courses around a new philosophical question each week. So sometimes it's about what kind of life we want to live. Sometimes it's about what the nature of justice is, or the nature of value. It might be about the kind of society we want to live in, or whether we have a moral duty towards our society to obey its laws. Could be more abstract questions about what we are as human beings, or what the mind is, whether we really are just a physical thing in a physical universe like we were talking about earlier, or whether the mind is something separate from the physical world. More contemporary topics like the nature of race and gender, for instance, that students really are often kind of confused about and want to try and understand the different possible positions on. The nature of science and why it's reliable, whether there's a scientific method that distinguishes sciences from other things. Lots and lots of different questions like this.
So you mentioned a few questions that are almost like ripped from the headlines in a sense. Are there philosophical questions that we're struggling with now that are really products of the modern age and of the information age that didn't really exist centuries before?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially in ethics, questions are evolving all the time. We have questions about climate justice that really weren't on the radar 50 years ago. Questions about technology and its uses in medicine, its uses in warfare, for instance, that are obviously modern questions. We've got questions about the mind and the extent to which the mind is like a computer, and vice versa, the extent to which a computer could possibly have itself a mind. All of these questions are kind of questions that arise as a result of developments in modern technology. And like you said before, other questions fall away. We do develop methods, and the questions, in my view, is that it kind of changes the questions, but whatever, they get sucked out of philosophy into different disciplines. Other questions fall out of fashion, and then some of them come back in again. Like in the ancient world, the question, why should we be good at all, was a really important philosophical question. It just went out of fashion for several hundred years. And now it's kind of an important issue for people to be thinking about again. So
overall, what do you enjoy most about teaching philosophy at Providence College?
Well, we have some wonderful students and we have some wonderful colleagues. So that's really great. I personally, I love teaching the required courses. I love the fact that I get to introduce students from across the university to philosophy for the very first time. I think that that's really exciting and really valuable. I love the range of different philosophy courses I get to teach. I forget how many different areas of philosophy I've taught now, but it's a lot. It's more than 10, I think. And then I love the interdisciplinarity, the fact that through DWC I get to teach not just texts from other disciplines, but also different perspectives on philosophical texts. Teach them in a way you wouldn't necessarily approach them in a pure philosophy course. This coming semester, I'm going to be teaching philosophy of mind for neuroscience students for the first time. That kind of opportunity to work with other departments, I think, is really valuable. It's really exciting for me.
So you mentioned the wide range of courses that are offered here at PC in philosophy. So I just want to open the floor here a little bit. Are there any particular courses that you or your colleagues are offering in the coming academic year that you want to plug?
Yeah, well, I'll always plug my philosophy of mind course because I love teaching that. I love to get lots of students in that. We have 3 Accinno Award winners in the philosophy department now. It's not just me. There's Chris Arroyo, there's Vance Morgan. We've got a couple of senior faculty who really should have won the Accinno Award but haven't, like Pete Costello and Alicia Carlson. And then we've got other faculty who really, I'm quite sure, will win it in the future, like Iman Alaban, Antonella Malozzi. So I would say, we've got fantastic faculty to study with and pick courses with these people, because you'll learn a lot and you'll really enjoy it.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. You have me really wishing that I could go back and take some philosophy courses, more philosophy courses as an undergrad. So this has been a really great conversation. We've learned some Wittgenstein, learned more about you. This has been a great time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Subscribe to the Providence College podcast in all the usual places, including iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, as well as your smart speaker. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Thanks for listening, and go Friars.